Checking. 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 All right, it's Friday. We're back again. All right, looking at it's Friday. We're back again. Dynamic data. Right, looking at searching using dynamic data, and searching using dynamic data. Some of this kind of ends up being searching using dynamic data. Some of this kind of ends up being searching using dynamic data. Some of this kind of ends up because collection view is becoming more of a thing. Some of this kind of ends up but I kind of wanted to talk through what search but I kind of wanted to talk through what search but I kind of wanted to talk through the basic thing that we show on the Reactive UI website is a search example, because that's like the example that's the UI website is to get across. A lot of people tell me that search is overdone, and a lot of people tell me that search is seen the search example and you have the .rx, then search is overdone because seen the search example and you have the it hasn't connected. So I've had some friends. So I've had some friends that had some friends. So I've had some friends that had some friends in 2020. But in 2020. But in 2020. But in 2020. But in 2020. All right, I think I'm getting duplicate audio again. Let me check my audio. Sorry, folks. I'm getting weird audio issues. I've been trying to upgrade my audio, and I continue to run into issues. All right, I think I'm getting duplicate audio again. Sorry, folks. All right. Seems like my audio's back more like right. So what I was saying was, in Reactive UI, we show a lot of the search example, and the search example is kind of overdone, but there's a lot there, and I feel like a lot of people miss the search example. So I did a talk earlier this year for .NET Conf about kind of going reactive and what that means. So I won't belabor that whole talk right now, but what I do want to point out, and what is important, is that we can use Rx to respond to events. Like Rx is really just a stream of events. So you are constantly raising and or dropping iNotify property change events. That adding and removing of iNotify property change events, or the raising of those events, is basically just a stream of events. And we don't look at it like that in the .NET space, but pretty much like every other language looks at it as just a stream of events. It's just a set of values that transpires over a given period of time until it either errors or completes. And that's basically what iObservable is, or iObserver is technically. But that's basically what the observer pattern is in .NET, is iObservable and iObserver. And I kind of went over that last week, so I won't belabor those interfaces again. But just kind of going through the search example, there's several ways to go about it. You can either subscribe directly to the text change events on the change events on the view, like coming from the UI element that is doing the thing, or you can go through your UI framework's binding engine. Now, I saw that Xamarin is now like officially supported by benchmark.net. So like I have designs to determine whether or not this approach is faster, because people ask me all the time, Rodney, what's your preference when doing this? And it's just like, well, sometimes they're not rooted in anything concrete. So if I can have performance examples of things that I do normally, then I can kind of say, hey, this is a better way because of performance, as opposed to just saying, oh, performance, and having the big performance stick to beat people with, and not actually adding any value. So getting actual performance metrics is a thing on my list to get done. There we go. So this is the basic gist of this is you have a search bar, you have some text change events, you're using RX to throttle those events. You're explicitly doing it off of the main thread, which in a mobile application matters a lot. And I'm pretty sure it probably matters in desktop just as much as it matters in mobile, if not more so, because you might have like, ooh, yeah, there's really only one UI thread. Yeah, it's interesting. But then we're just doing a select to get the value out of the text changed event after we've throttled. Throttle is a RX operator that is like pure magic. It will make sure that it hasn't changed from the last value. We'll verify that it's not null, and then we'll invoke whatever the search command is, right? So like that's the basic gist of that pattern. And I explicitly do this when I talk about it. I explicitly do it from the view because everybody, like regardless of whether or not you understand MVVM, you understand events, right? Because like you have to deal with them when you're dealing with a UI kit in the .NET space. So looking at it as a stream of events, right? Like I just convert it to a stream of events and then I can throttle back on that stream of events. I can do all sorts of fun and exciting things based on the eventing pattern at that point. So like now I have events that I can do explicit things with, and I can chain together these link-like operators to get that done. So this is actually bound to a list view. This does all of the same general things. Yeah, this does all of the same general things. It's just normally what you would do is you would use some MVVM binding, bind this probably in your XAML or in your C# if you're using C# or whatever UI kit you're using in whatever way they bind. You would go through a binding engine and then you could do this in the view model. And I think I have an example of that maybe. Nope, I don't. Okay, that's the search command. So yeah, I don't have that in here. Oh, lucky you. You don't have to suffer through me explaining the exact same. Oh, wait, no, there it is. Haha. I win again. It's the same thing, right? Like I can do the same concept. I can do a win any value on the search text, and that will give me the same. It'll give me the same overall experience. It's just going through the binding engine as opposed to the events themselves. So instead of writing all of this code live today, which I get live streaming, part of it is just like sitting there hammering out the code. I felt like people have seen other people write Xamarin enough to not have to sit here and go through all of that. And we can kind of walk through how the code is structured, what dynamic data does, and then actually add the search function because the search function isn't wired up. So I think probably the only actual live coding we'll do today is wiring up that search function just to see what that looks like. So given that, like you see, like I said, I got my code sitting over here. Everything's going well. I'm going to drop this panel real quick so I can get more surface area. So that kind of gives you the basic concept. And here I'm doing a similar thing where I'm binding to dynamic data, but I'm not actually using dynamic data for my search, right? I'm doing some other stuff in my search function, right, to determine whether or not I should do that work. So when I go and execute my search, I'm really just going and doing a query against DuckDuckGo again. So this was set up to go against a DuckDuckGo API, real simple, real quick. It uses refit behind the scenes as a service generator. So this is the whole example is quick and dirty, but this is a different search example, right? This is a live search. I'm explicitly going out to the internet, searching for something and bringing back values versus having a list view of items and wanting to search inside that list, right? So that's a completely different experience. So today we're going to do the latter, and we're going to talk about searching a set of values that we already have on a device. And I probably can go even further in another stream and take it to where I implement some like segment view and then segment out the dynamic data list and do a grouping, some grouping stuff, and then some stuff by type. So there's a lot of stuff I didn't implement here, but I just kind of wanted to get the ball rolling. And just so I can tell you around how long it took me to get set up, barring some issues that I had. Just checking my time scheduler thingy-majigger. Yeah, so it took me only about 3 hours to set up. And again, that was me tinkering with, playing with, putting together the patterns the way that would work, and running into some what I perceive as bugs in either the way reactive UI is handling something in Xamarin.Forms or something in Xamarin.Forms. One way or the other, it's newer functionality in Xamarin.Forms, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say that it probably didn't work, and because I didn't have any way to integration test those things, or try out the new functionality, which is actually part of what I'm doing in another app, which this will actually end up getting folded into, is my showroom application, so I can showcase all of reactive UI's functionality against Xamarin's functionality, and kind of do what I want to say David or maybe it's James, I forget. I think it's David. David has a playground where he implements all of the new Xamarin.Forms bits that I've seen. So that's one thing that I think I've been missing, and that I think that I could do better. As a library maintainer, is have a staging area where I can verify that my library bits work against the UI kit bits. Wow, that sounded weird. But anyway, so that kind of gets you an understanding of like what's happening with the search. This is like basic dynamic data. And like I said, we're going to walk through all of this today and kind of get an understanding. Another thing that I've been doing is, because I've been doing so much live streaming, I kind of abstracted my data that I use on a consistent basis, the APIs, the service definitions, all of that. I abstracted that away into a library, and I now have that sourced on NuGet. So like now when I just need to get some dummy data, to mock out a screen, or a mock service, or even my DuckDuckGo API stuff, like it's sourced now, so all I have to do is bring it in and use it, as opposed to copy and paste it around every single project, because that becomes tedious, and I lose code, and then code gets updated, and it's constantly broken, and it's just a cluster. So okay, so we've talked enough about stuff that doesn't matter. Let's dig into the stuff that does, right? So let's go ahead and bring up, I'm going to press buttons over here and hope that I don't break the streaming experience, right? So I press the button and everything should work. Yeah, okay, so you can now see my emulator. So we got my emulator going. And we're again going to hope that we're not going to break anything, because I was playing with this sample right before the stream, and I don't remember if I left it in the right state. So it builds. That's part of the game. And the other part of the game is it loads without breaking. I'm trying to think of how much bandwidth I'm probably taking up. I should probably kill a couple of chat clients and see what happens. Oh no, I think I broke it. It's looking like I broke it. Okay, maybe it just doesn't like being on live stream. Maybe that's the problem. We'll go with that. Maybe it's just shy, or maybe we should stop it, clean it, and do all the normal Xamarin stuff that we have to do, which I'm hoping soon we won't have to do when Xamarin becomes a full first-class citizen in the .NET framework via MAUI. I think that will be a great thing when we are a first-class citizen, and the multi-platform aspect of .NET has to adhere to the .NET framework standards. I think that's an exciting thing, because then I think it's going to be less of an afterthought and more of a we have a seat at the table. And I feel like right now Xamarin was acquired by Microsoft and hasn't really had a seat at the table. And I think that getting that seat at the table will increase. I'm hoping. I don't think. I hope. My hope is that getting a seat at that table will give us more ability to affect the direction of the framework. So I'm just going over here and cleaning my bin and doing some stuff. So you're going to see a whole bunch of stuff break. I might even end up breaking Pharmacist, which happens every once in a while. I think that happened a couple of times to me on live stream, where I go and do the build and clean and it goes away. So the other thing I'll point out about my IDE today is I've been playing around with rider themes, because I like things that are easy on my eyes. I've always been the type of person that I want my IDE color coded so that I can look at it and understand what's going on. So this is actually a theme that is based on VS Code, which I like VS Code's look. Every time I look at VS Code, like VS Code looks nice and clean, and it's simple and straightforward. But I'm actually going to be potentially changing how I deal with some of the theme, because some of the things I actually want to invert some of these colors. But let's see if now that my random babbling has bought me enough time to get this application to run. It builds, it loads, it's loading. It's hitting breakpoints. Okay, so now it's loaded. So we'll go ahead and show you what's going on now. Now you will be able to see the thing. Okay, make sure that I still look good. Still looking good, Billy Ray. All right. So hopefully I can get rid of a whole bunch of breakpoints. So you'll see that my list is blank, right? So let's imagine that I have to go to the internet and get some data. So I go and pull the refresh and look, my list populates. Now there's going to be a bug that you're going to see here in a minute, and we're going to try our best to work around it, because I wanted to code this correctly based on the new Xamarin quote-unquote standard way of doing inversion of control on lists. I used to use the X reference stuff by name, but supposedly that's not the preferred way to do it going forward. So I'm trying to be compliant with the preferred way of doing it so that I can make sure that my code functions correctly, and any bugs that may surface I can catch sooner up in the process than later. And eventually this will be running on Xamarin.Forms pre-releases and all of that fun and exciting stuff. So that said, you'll notice we've got this search bar, and right now we can type stuff in here, and we'll notice that the search bar literally does nothing. Great, no big deal. Search bar is not doing anything. We've got this add button up here, which we'll get into in a minute. Oh, Rodney did the bad thing, didn't he? Yeah, he did the bad thing. Oh well, let's actually do this. Let's make that 4 and save that. The data's gonna die. So because I'm actually running dynamic data, I'm not using the design time data that works with the hot reload. So unfortunately, when I'm working on list views with dynamic data, I have to refresh if I'm trying to get the hot reload to work. Hopefully, hot restart and some of the things that they've got coming will make this cleaner and better in the future. It's still not doing what I want, but long and short, this is just, oh no, it is doing what I want. Okay, so this is just the name, it's just displaying the name. Got it. Okay, so right now this is displaying the name of a drink, of a coffee drink. Again, if you've not ever watched me stream before, coffee is usually my business domain because I drink so much of it, and because I want, I like to just have a consistent thing to talk about, so I'm not getting caught up in the diversity of a business domain, and we're talking more about the code. So here we'll see that I'm going to walk you through kind of how all that worked and what was going on with that. So we'll go to the list view model, and this is where our list view model is instantiated. You'll notice that I've got a when any value on the search text, which is not actually wired up to anything. So that's actually just going to cause memory leaks for right now, or actually probably won't cause memory leaks because it doesn't actually have a subscription. I don't think. Maybe it does. Oh, I think it is bound to the view, so maybe it does. But it's not going to do anything, so I don't think it matters. You'll notice here that I have this iData service, so I'm going to go dig into this a little bit, and maybe I'm going to have to dig around the code to show you what I want to show you. So let's actually make that just the code for a second, right? Because we don't care about the debugger at the moment. So this iData service is part of that stuff that I was telling you about, where I use, I've got this synthetic, which is my mock data. I hate using such repeat examples, so when I get a chance to name stuff fun, I try to name stuff fun, because who doesn't like fun things? Party poopers, that's who doesn't like fun things. Here we go, let's go to the startup, and we will dig into, where do we instantiate it? We instantiate it here, okay. So this drink data service is just it's not gonna let me get to the base class. So behind the scenes, there's just a dynamic data cache, a source cache, and we'll just code one up real quick, I guess, because that'll probably be easier than trying to F12 into the entire world. But long and short, this is just an abstraction on top of a dynamic data source cache. So what does a source cache look like, right? Like we've got some var source cache means source cache, what item type is it? Let's do item view model. Well, I think it's actually a DTO. I think I'd actually do like the drink DTO. Yeah, I think I'm doing the drink DTO. And then I'm doing this as a, I think this is the GUID, which ends up being the ID, if I could type. Yeah, okay, cool. So that's basically what's going on under the hood. So then you'll see what I have available to me in the source cache is I have this source cache and I have stuff like connect. So what you see here with this change set is basically I've already done the connect and the ref count for myself. So I just get a stream of values. I could change that and explicitly provide like the iObservable cache, which I've done in the past. But I'm trying to play with, as soon as the data is present in my data service, it just emits values to my view model. Trying to be as reactive as I possibly can. So I'm playing around with this pattern right now. So if I come back in 6 months and I'm like, oh, that was a horrible pattern, don't follow it. Make sure that you can easily go back and rip out your own code. Just saying, you know, don't take everything I say or do as gold, because I am a developer that is fallible and capable of making mistakes. But long and short, this is a iDrink service, which is giving me a source cache of DTOs. So behind this abstraction, I'm going out to the internet, I am calling API, I am getting values, I am putting them back in my database, and I am emitting those new values out to the view model to bind to the view, right? Like that's everything that sits behind that abstraction in a nutshell. Is all of that wired up right now? No, this is using, again, that's using synthetic, so it's using my actual dummy data, so I don't have to make network calls. But eventually my plan is to actually stand up a SignalR API and a web API, or maybe not web API. I actually may do Nancy because I want to play with some Nancy stuff. I've heard Nancy is awesome. And all the people that I know that use Nancy are like, it's great, so maybe I'll just do some Nancy and .NET Core to figure out how to play with that. But long and short, I'm going to wire this up to an API and then expose those things as well, so that way I can show full fidelity what that would and should look like. So what are we looking at? Okay, so I get my list of data from the data source, right, which is my DTOs, and I'm going to immediately transform it to my item view model, which is basically just a convention that pretty much everybody that I know that does Xamarin.Forms apps, if they have a list view or a collection view, but I'm gonna just use list view because a collection view is basically a list view. It's not basically a list view, but it is a type of list view. It displays a list of items. How it does it is different, but that's what it does. So I've got an item view model that I basically instantiate, or this could even be a factory method. Like if I really wanted to be that anal about using solid principles, I could inject some I view model factory and factory this out if I had to be that explicitly ridiculous. But again, and I can't stress this enough, this is right. I'm going to get back to this when we talk about the inversion of control. These items should be lightweight. The control structure is the list, and the list should be responsible for acting on the items. The items should not be responsible for notifying complex information out. So the commands that exist should exist on the list view model, and the items should more or less just be POCOs that explicitly raise notify property change or do some property change calculations. That's my way of doing things. I've seen people do things other ways. I think that this is just the cleanest way to do it, and Xamarin is doing more to support that effort. So I think that that's kind of the same message that they're sending is, hey, this is kind of the right way to do it. Try and be smart about the way you do these things. Invert your control, because inversion of control isn't just, I was having this conversation with a colleague last week. Inversion of control is not just about putting stuff in an IOC container. Inversion of control is about understanding when to invert the control flow to give that power of control logic to the correct entity. So it's not about, it's like if the item view model was the right place to do something, I would say inverting the control to the item view model is the way to do this. Or it should be done on the list view, so we should invert the control or the execution point to the list view model. Right, so we're just newing up these items. I've got an auto refresh on ID, which this is a dynamic data thing that basically is going to say when this thing notifies property change, refresh. I'm not sure if I can do multiples. I didn't play with that, and that's kind of beyond the scope of this. You can kind of play with this API yourself and see what works and what doesn't. I'm deferring this until it's actually got data in it, so that this whole thing won't even execute until I actually have data. That actually could probably go further up or down the stack of transformation. I'm also getting extremely anal about where things are placed in an observable chain. Like putting it in the most correct spate or place on the observable chain is the right thing to do. So we should seek to do that because, I'm an opinionated developer and you're an opinionated developer, and we need to have consensus about what the opinions are going to be for the team. And the consensus should always be what's best for the cognitive load of the team, or should incorporate what's best for the cognitive load of the team. It shouldn't all be based on that. So anyway, we're transforming, we're auto refreshing, we're deferring, we're sorting. So we're explicitly doing a sort. And I'm actually going to take this out shortly so you can see the difference, but we're explicitly sorting based on type. So this sort is where I would do some type of like segmented control. I would have like a sort comparer here, and that would change it. Or no, I'm sorry, not a segmented control. If I was doing like a sort on, or maybe, yeah, if I was doing like a segmented control for sort, or a drop down for sort, I would do that here. We're going to add a filter here in a little bit to see how filter works. Because basically what we're going to do is the way that the other reactive example does things, I need to go to the view, is it's going to actually make the changes in the underlying, or it's actually going to query out and then get an entire new list of data. We aren't actually ever going to do that. We're going to stick with the same list of data and then just update it. Reduce it. We're actually going to reduce the list of data. So something that I should take a pause, and I'll apologize if this seems disjointed. I try to make my live streams organic, but at the same time, try and stick to somewhat of a loosely defined script. So I have things that I know I want to get across. One of those things is this. What we're trying to show here today is that dynamic data is inherently better than observable collection, right? So if I did this and put all of this in an observable collection and then I added something to the observable collection, right? So let's go ahead and spin up the simulator and talk about this. If I put all of this in an observable collection, what I would end up doing at some point is rebinding the entire observable collection, right? Because I notify property change and I notify collection change are not created equal. Basically, the reason why you constantly do new observable collection is because observable collection doesn't surface I notify collection changes, or I notify property changes when the collection changes, right? So in order to get the property on the view model to change, you have to rebind it, thereby notifying the property change of the collection. Now, you can write some logic that every time the collection updates, you explicitly do the notify property change, and that will work. I've done it in the past. It's not ideal, but it works. It still doesn't get us there, right? So let's go ahead and load this list. One of the things that you'll notice about this list is, and we're going to talk about, the whole point is this is a full featured list where I can add stuff and remove stuff. Oh, I took the context swipe off, so I couldn't get the context swipe to work earlier. So I added these buttons back, and then these buttons are also giving me a problem with my inversion of control logic. So I'm going to have to talk to somebody who's smarter than me about Xamarin to figure out what I'm either doing wrong or what bug I don't see that's in the in either my framework or their framework. So one of the things that we'll notice in Xamarin.Forms is you actually get this really nice animation when you remove something from the list, right? And again, I can't show you again because that's the bug. But let's see if we can get it to function. We're just going to go with some brewed coffee, and we just want, let's go with we want a blonde roast. Blonde roast, yay. All right, so we save it. So you'll notice blonde roast just added itself down here, right? So because dynamic data surfaces, I notify collection changes to the binding of the observable collection, or it's using a read-only observable collection, which is, again, we're talking like apples and apples, really. We're just talking about types of apples. you actually get the animation when something is added or removed from this list. Why does that matter? That matters because when you do the same thing by rebinding the observable collection, you actually repaint the entire list. So if this list has 100, 200, 300 items, that entire list has to be repainted. The entire thing has to redo. Versus dynamic data is just surfacing change sets, so it knows which one is removed. And that's actually what I think the bug is that what's happening is the ancestor is getting removed, so the can execute is going to false because it no longer exists. So I may have to do some like reactive UI bind to stuff to make that work, which I haven't tried yet because I ran up against a time wall earlier and was just like, yeah, this will be good enough for the stream. They'll get the point. Hopefully they won't yell at me and tell me I'm a horrible developer because it doesn't work 100%. It will. Again, all of this is on my list of things to add to my my showroom application. I'll actually paste that in the link, or that link in the chat real quick, so that anyone on the stream who wants to go to my showroom can go to the showroom floor and check out what we're talking about. And this showroom floor is going to change like drastically over the next, I don't know how many months and weeks, because it's gonna constantly evolve. But we'll go ahead and paste this in there so you can look at that if you want to. So what ends up happening here, and what we end up dealing with, is dynamic data is explicitly doing things that observable collection is incapable of doing. And I want to say Andrew Hoffling a couple of years ago, and I got this secondhand information because I wasn't privy to when it happened, tried to provide this capability to observable collection. I want to say he PR'd it in and it got merged back out because people were mad that somebody fixed the bugs and broke their workarounds. So I'll take a moment here to get on a soapbox. If you're mad at me because I fix a bug and break your workaround to a bug that I already created, then I think our relationship is already broken and we need to redefine our relationship. Primarily because I'm doing everything in my power to try and make sure that your application is robust by using the tools that I give you. So if I break something, I want to fix it, and I want to fix it regardless of whether or not you built a workaround for it. Now, we could argue whether or not the semantic version needs to bump, whether or not it's a breaking change. We can argue that all day. But not taking my change, right? Not implementing the change because it's a breaking change because you broke something previously, I disagree. I disagree. So, and I'm just kind of reconfiguring code because there's a very explicit way that I like to look at RX code, because I will get on the XAML soapbox. One of the things that people talk about XAML, why they think it's better than a C# UI or a coded UI in general, a markup. Let's go with markup versus code, right? Let's make it less about XAML and more about markup versus code. People say that markup is more readable, right? And it's neater and it's cleaner, and I'm like, yeah, again, those are not attributes of the markup. Those are things that the developer has to consciously do regardless of whether or not it's code or markup. So I, trying to be a good steward of my own code, like to make sure that my functions, I'm going to butcher that name if I say it. So Antal Almada. Yes, I'm glad you agree, right? Because that's the thing. Like, you have to be responsible. You have to be a good steward of your code. Like, I even go as far as putting code analyzers in, like style cop analyzers, that will forcibly make it so that my code won't compile if the code isn't structured correctly. Why? Because we read a lot of code. If all the private stuff is stuck in with all the public stuff, and this file is difficult to read, right? Like, if I can't come over here and look at this, oh, you can't see that. So yeah, here we go. We'll move the simulator. So if you can't come over here and just look at this structure easily, right, and see what's there, then looking at it from this aspect makes it very simple. And at this point, there's no analyzers on this project, but I do it instinctively. Why? Because extra white space is ugly. It's a horrible thing. Don't do it. I actually should probably move that back into an observable create. And again, some of this code is me playing around with different patterns to try and understand what I think are the correct patterns. Because technically I could just return this observable, and this would observe to the observable, but I don't know if I want to explicitly dispose with that observable inside my control flow of the view model. So these are things that I'm playing with so that I can answer other people's questions better around what are best practices. Anybody that knows me knows that I don't like the concept of best practices. I think that there are good practices and better practices, but there are no bad practices. The only bad practices are the practices that keep you from shipping software. It's that simple. And I'm sure that a lot of people would agree with me. So, the key is, as software developers, is we're supposed to ship software. So, getting off of my soapbox and getting back to the task at hand, right? We want to wire up search, right? Like I want to search through this list of options and just pick the option that's correct for me. So I've actually got some code already wired up on another thing, but we're going to type it in as we go just so that we can talk about it, because I think that adds some value. So we're going to make this thing go to the left third of the screen. Yay. And then I can make this go away. Okay, great. So now I got my code up. So what we're going to do, dispose many. Okay, so dispose many is a dynamic data concern. So, okay, I didn't go through the entire API. Let me go through what this entire chunk of code is doing. This entire chunk of code, what it's saying is, and we're going to probably break out to just the code for a second, right? So here we go. What this entire chunk of code is saying is this. I've got an abstraction around a dynamic data cache, which gives me an observable change set, which is basically, this is the same thing as if I was have to do like source cache, Rodney can type, source cache dot connect dot ref count, right? That's all part of the dynamic data API. So we do a transform, we do auto refresh, we do the defer until loaded. So I talked about those, right? I talked about those already. So here, this is basically saying, hey, we want to marshal the changes that we do back to the UI thread, and then we're binding out to this underlying view models. So the other thing that I'll point out about this is this lets me cleanly separate my data layer from my view model layer. Right? So we talk about like having models, having view models, right? I can, like, now my data is encapsulated behind this data service, but in my view model where I'm creating my list view, I can create my view model items in a very simple to use transform method. So that's basically the same as a select method from regular link. And then dispose many, to answer your question, CoseDev, is that dispose many basically says, as the change notifications internal to dynamic data are ready to be disposed, go ahead and dispose of them. So in this particular case, right, we're actually doing a sample where we're adding and removing things. Well, we would want dynamic data to be a good steward of its allocations and dispose of itself behind itself when it can. So dynamic data gives you an extension point to say, hey, as I'm disposing of things and I'm getting rid of things and items are being removed, replaced, updated, go ahead and get rid of any internal subscriptions that I have because I don't need them. And then I'm going to actually subscribe to the dynamic data change set, which again is just an observable of change sets. And then I'm going to be a good steward and dispose of it when I dispose of my view model subscriptions. So hopefully that answers your question about what dispose many is, right? It's part of the dynamic data API. So what we're going to do here next is add some search capability into the mix. So I wrote this code a couple of weeks back, and then I showed the concept to one of my mentors in the RX space. And the first thing that, of course, I gave it out of context because context is king. And the first thing that mentor says to me is, well, you could have done a local function. And I'm like, duh. Smart person, it's RX, it's done in the constructor, it's already a local function. And they were like, oh. So of course they couldn't just be like, hey, Rodney, that's a great job. Like any good mentor would. They have to tell you, oh, yeah, well, it's good, but you could do better. Just like, eh. So we're going to create a local function which takes in our search term. Right? Again, Rodney can type search term. And that search term is going to, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to see if, I am just doing good things today. We're going to check to see whether or not the search term is null or empty, because if the search term is not null or empty, then we won't actually get anything in our list until we put in something that the evaluation criteria can do. So basically what this is saying is, hey, if the search term is empty, just go ahead and load the entire list. No, we want search term. Yep. What is Rodney not seeing? Oh, derp. It's a local function. There we go. So again, we're going to be good stewards of our code as we write our code, because that's what good stewards of code do. This ends up being a local function. So here we're just going to return true. And in the ongoing debate on brackets, no brackets, I'm a brackets guy, because if the thing is that brackets are there past 1, then just put them there all the time. Stop trying to be funny or special. So we'll return the view model, right? And we'll check to see if the type, right? So the type is an enum. So we'll take the enum and we'll toString it, right? And then we'll check to see if it contains the search term, right? But that's not the only thing that we care about. We also care about whether or not the title or the name, because in this we're just using the name, right, includes the search term, or if the view model dot description, right? So because there's a description on there that you can't see on the screen. I didn't bind it to the screen. Again, it was a time wall thing. It'll get there eventually, and you'll see what that does. But actually, we'll probably even still be able to see it, because I think I'm at least converting it. Am I doing that? We can put the description in, right? So here we'll put the description equals x dot description. So yeah, so we'll add the description so at least it's searchable. Okay, and then we'll just return that. So that's our local function. So that's what's actually doing our search, right? So then dynamic data has this filter concept, right? So you can do filters a couple of ways in dynamic data. And this is where the fun begins, right? Like I can do a filter, and I can add in the filter just by a property on the, right, having some truth value. I can do it that way, or I can actually provide this filter an observable itself, and then it actually immediately becomes more functional. So when I realized that, like, let's go look at the API real quick. So if you'll notice, there's like this change set. There's this change set. I'm throwing stuff around my office. There's a change set that takes a func, and then there's one down here that takes a iObservable func. There we go. So we're going to give it some iObservable function, and that function is just going to happen as the things change, and it's all going to work itself out. So we had this when any value up here, or this when any value on search text up here, and now we're actually we're going to surface it and use it. What we're going to do here is we're going to do a when any value on the search text. And the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to throttle, right? So this is actually where we're going to write the same search logic that we wrote before, but we're just going to write it out by hand so we can talk about it, right? So we're going to throttle, which throttle says if I get an event before the throttle timer is done, buffer the thoughts, right? So don't return to me until there's this amount of time of inactivity, right? And then I can explicitly run that on the task pool scheduler. So this is where like RX really starts to shine, right? Because we know as people that use UI kits, right? If this search text iNotify property change is happening on the UI thread, and I go and sleep in that change notification handler, then I'm sleeping on the UI thread. Anybody that's ever had an iOS hard crash, a SIGBART error that slept on the UI thread knows that you don't sleep on the UI thread. So what we're actually explicitly able to tell RX is that when this iNotify property change event happens, and when we go to do the throttle of that event, do it on a background task. Marshal yourself to another task and deal with it there. Right? So then we're going to do all of our logic, because now we're acting on a background thread. So now we're going to say we want to be distinct until changed. And then we're going to explicitly do our select on our search term, right? So that makes it easy because, again, this is just a function. So now we could write this in line, but I'm a functional programmer, right? The whole point of writing functions is writing functions. So everywhere where I can delegate out, and you'll even see it here, right? Like my reactive commands. You'll see people create command definitions and put their command definition in line. And that works for some people. To me, that's way too much cognitive load, because when I'm looking at all of this, sometimes I don't care about the implementation of what's going to happen when the command that's bound to the button actually works. Because remember, the command is just a binding extension point. So I don't care about any of that. I just want to see the code, and then if I need to dig into this, all I gotta do is hit F12 and I dig in and I can go see it. So, I'm hiding implementation details behind functions. So now we'll see that I've written my function, I've got my throttle, and this filter is just waiting for me to give it something. So here's where things get fun. I don't like the idea of putting this, because we just got done saying, yeah, like, don't give me cognitive overload. I could technically put this right in here. I don't like that for a lot of reasons. Home roll. So for whatever reason, my chat notifications are coming through all sorts of out of whack. So welcome everybody who's joined. Like, I just saw home roller join and say hello, but it's like anyway, it's completely and totally out of order. So we're going to go ahead and do the filter. I think we should probably do the filter before we do the sort. That makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually just assign this to something real quick. And we're going to say that this is our var search changed. Right? Because that's basically what this is this is just the place where we're getting search change notifications. So again, I'm going to be a good steward of my code and put it on proper lines so that it's not hard to read. And then I'm going to dump that search filter in there. So now we're actually going to wire this up. I'm going to put some breakpoints in here, and we are going to see the thing happen. I'm going to put a breakpoint there, but that's actually probably going to be a bad thing in the long run. But we'll put it there and then we'll pull it out. So we'll go ahead and put this pane back up. We'll run that thing. And while we're waiting for the emulator load, dumb question, what is that the search is being done against? Oh, it's not a dumb question. If you're just joining, the search is going to be done against a list of data. So we're actually going to go through that right now. So let's go ahead and pull up our emulator and talk about exactly that, right? So again, we've got a list view. What is the source of the search? What is, yeah, we're going to go through that right now. Yeah, so the source of the search is, so again, when I normally do this RX, this RX example, I'm going out to the internet via some like DuckDuckGo service and getting back data and displaying it on a screen. A lot of times in Xamarin.Forms applications, we have a list of data that we actually want to explicitly search through. We want to group by, we want to filter by type. We want to do a segmented control that only shows data by type. These are the things that I find are similar that I do in almost every Xamarin.Forms application I write. So what I'm showing today is how to search through a list of data. So what we're getting here is now you'll notice that it's hitting my search term. My search term is null, and it's just going to return true. I'm not going to belabor it through going through all of those. Oh, look, my description is now there. That's all it took to get my description to show up. Was to actually give it a value and bind it to the list. So I've got a list of just coffee drinks, right? Like the source of that search, for lack of a better term, is the data that's coming from this iData service, right? I'm pulling in data from my iData service, And then I am doing a whole bunch of stuff with dynamic data, which we already talked about. So I'm not going to continue to go back and beat that dead horse. And specifically what we're showing right now is the search capability. So we've got this list of data that came from our data source, whether it be an API call, whether it be the database, whether it be some conglomerate of both or aggregate of both. And we are explicitly surfacing change notifications out from a dynamic data cache under the hood of that representation. So this change set is basically the representation of the iObservable iChange set that dynamic data provides. So all of that is then getting bound out to this list. So now I want to like I'm the kind of guy that, you know, some days, depending upon how hot it is outside, depending upon, you know, how aggravated I am with life, I want different types of coffee, right? So today I want something that's hot and bold. So I was like, now this may blow up because, you know, we're doing live coding, so bear with me, folks. But I want something that's hot. You'll notice that the search term finally came through as hot, but it didn't come through right away because this throttle happened. So I'm actually going to go back and increase that throttle timer in a minute to show you exactly what that does. But it didn't wait until, or it didn't happen on every single text change notification, right? Because your normal text change event handler would trigger every single text change, right? So you would have gotten this to trigger every single character that you pressed. We've throttled that on a background thread, so we're not having to deal with that. So now we're going to go ahead and run this and just hope that Rodney is smart enough to be able to get this right the first time. Oh, we have to go through each one. It's going to go through the whole thing. Do we have to do an auto refresh? No, that should have taken care of it because the search happened. So apparently we don't know what we're doing. Let's figure this out. The search term would have hot in it, so that should hit, right? Okay, so let's do it by name, right? So let's do why are we not getting change notifications anymore? What did we break? We broke something. This is where it's like, am I smarter than a fifth grader? And the answer usually ends up being no. So we're explicitly getting the notifications. Do we need to do an auto refresh? Let me go look. Yeah, like we shouldn't need to do a refresh. That should take care of it. So what am I missing? The filter happens. Oh. No. That should still work. That should still work. Yeah, this should work. Okay, so then what are we doing wrong? This might have to do with the fact that I might need to I might have to do some RX. It's not a... It might be a casing thing, but I definitely gave it the correct case. So yeah, it could be a casing issue, right? So maybe we should do like let's do this. Like, let's just go ahead and do it low tech right now. So we'll do a .2 lower on that, and we'll do a .2 lower on everything else, right? Now, again, this is bad form, and we can make this better, but... And then we'll do a .2 lower on the search term as it comes in. So let's do this, just so that we're doing it once. So the lower equals search term .2 lower, right? So we go lower, because this is the part where it's like, I know I had this working, this works, because I just did it not too long ago. Oh, well, no, that shouldn't matter because it's whatever the search term is. Okay, so let's figure this out. I also didn't get subsequent notifications, which is odd, right? Because like I should get notifications at any given point. So maybe I actually do need to do some type of like activation. No, it should just work. I'm gonna go with it should just work. So, okay, now I've got my data back again. So I'll go ahead and fill my list using pull to refresh. And now I'm not getting anything. Oh, okay, no, I'm not getting anything. La 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 la. No, yeah, that's probably erroring. Failing silently, the search term. Let's just pull that down there. That way we know it's not null, right? And then we explicitly have a value. Maybe we did something else smart. We didn't make any changes to where this is doing work. So that shouldn't matter. Maybe we need to subscribe on where the change set is happening. This is the fun part about live coding. Okay, so now I'm getting data again. Okay, that's good. So I've got stuff in my list. So let's go ahead and search. Oh, we may not be able to search the type that way. Yeah, so okay, so we've got lowered the type. The type of that one is Americano. That's weird because that shouldn't be that. That should. Oh, okay. No, it's good. It's got to go through the entire list. If matches, so it's got to go through the entire list. Okay, so let's go to one where the. All right, so like I feel like this should work. Unless I'm okay, I may explicitly be breaking something by not. Okay. This is where I will do a subscribe on RX app dot task pool scheduler. Oh no, subscribe on and see what happens. That. So again, this is like one of those Wizard of Oz moments to pay no attention. Yeah, it's one of those where it's like it just doesn't make sense. Because like I said, I had this code working. If I had to guess, it's got something to do with all of this extra stuff that I'm doing, and we may just reduce it so that it's not having to look at the type and do the toString. Or maybe it's the way that I'm loading the data. Okay, that's interesting. So if you notice that, I had to pull the refresh twice that time when I did the subscribe on. This is why subscribe on is generally considered bad. Because it may be that I need to expose the actual cache itself, so I may need to go do this like explicitly to implement it. And if that's the case, then we'll just go do that, right? It's not the end of the world. So we should be able to do like latte, right? We just want a latte. We get the change notification. Everything should just kind of refresh. Maybe it's my auto refresh is what's broken. This is extremely interesting. Because like I say, I had this working, like this is working in some code that I just shipped this week or last week. So I know this works. All right, let's take complexity out until we find the root cause. Yeah, so all of this is just going to go away for the moment. And we're going to check to see whether or not toLower.contains. And we're just going to return the truth value of whether or not the search term toLower is the title. So right, we're doing that, right? Where the view model title, right? So what we already have contains the term that's coming in. So like, yeah, we're not botching that. I have a feeling it might have something to do with my auto refresh logic and that like that's breaking something. Oh, it might be that defer until loaded because I don't think I have it in my other example. Yeah, that might be it. So let's check that out. Let's check out and see. So now we're pulling the refresh, and we explicitly have a delay on it to make it simulate a network call. Just by the by. So here, when I do, and we did it by title now. So if I do like roast, okay, now it's working. So it is definitely got to do with something in our additional search logic. When we just search the title, everything works. So like, if I had to guess, I would say that it's probably the way I'm doing this. So let's just go ahead and take the type out. So we won't be able to search by type. We'll have to find another way to filter on type later. But just for the context of this stream, you'll at least be able to see how it works. And then I'm going to show you some of the other full features that I did specifically for this example. for people trying to use ListView with reactive UI and implement this themselves, there is a bug, and I'll show it to you in a minute again, that I'm going to have to research now. You know, lucky me, I went and wrote some code that proved that there's a bug somewhere, and now somebody's got to fix it. And unfortunately, that somebody is hopefully not me, but probably is me, but may not be me, because somebody smarter than me may fix it. Hopefully somebody smarter than me fixes it. So now that's broken too. Okay, so now we're starting to see what the problem is. We don't need the subscribe on. We'll take that off. So if the title... Okay. No, that shouldn't matter. That legitimately shouldn't matter, because if the title's not populated, well, all the titles should be populated, yeah? Let's figure this out, because in worst case, we can go roll our own data layer, and I can actually show you how I'm generating this data, and bring up some of that code. Okay, so now my original pull to refresh is fixed, so that subscribe on would have broken more than it fixed. Side note, that's why subscribe on is generally frowned upon, because usually we want observe on instead of subscribe on. As you see, subscribe on, taking it off just fixed a problem. So now if I do my search again, and this is correct, right? Like, I'm checking to see whether or not the title or the description has the value, which I think is fine, right? That's not surfacing any changes. So it's gotta be that, right? Like, it's gotta be the fact that something is just weird. Oh, okay, derp. Everything doesn't have a description. Oh, that's how you feel? So this is where I say this code could be cleaned up and done better. So then we'll do false. And now we'll have to put that. There we go. Okay, so now we'll explicitly say that if that's broken, then it's broken. Don't fix it. Okay, because they don't all have a description. And Rodney doesn't realize that this is like simple things can break simple things. Nullability can break your search if you're not careful. So that's the ugly way to do it. I would probably write some mechanism that lets me look at the thing and tell whether or not it contains based on too low, or like I'd write my own extension. Okay, pull to refresh works. Okay, we're good. So now I should be able to search description. So I want something hot, and I get just the hot ones. Now you'll also notice that when this goes back, the list gets animations. Observable collection. Explicitly, it's signing. Observable collection will not give you that experience out of the box in Xamarin.Forms. It just flat out will not do it. And that animation, to me, is a nice user experience that Xamarin.Forms gives you for free. You just can't use it because observable collection is not what it was supposed to be. It's not what I signed on for. When I became an MVVM developer and I was working, yeah, it is nice, right? Like, so when I became an MVVM developer, they told me about iNotify property change, and they said, go forth and conquer the world, but they never explained iNotify collection change. And this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about the fact that dynamic data is going to surface individual change notifications for items in the list. That means that it knows where the relative place is in the list because it's a sorted list. And when we put things in or pull things out, it goes in the correct place. Case in point, we've got a sort, right? So we've got a sort on ID and type. So notice that the type macchiato seems to be at the top, right? So now we've got this add button. We're going to go add a new one, and we're going to add it explicitly. We're going to add a new macchiato, right? And this is like the new. Yeah. So when we add it, notice it adds at the end of the macchiatos. Like, it adds in the right place in the list. This is a full-featured list view. You don't have to write any additional code. You don't have to write additional stuff around observable collection. You give your data to a dynamic data source cache. You let this dynamic data source cache manage those change notifications for you, surface them, tell it what to do when those change notifications happen, and it goes off and just does the thing. And that's a beautiful, clean way to do it. Now, let's talk about the number of lines of code that it took to implement this, right? We're going to go ahead and stop showing the emulator for a second, and let's talk about just the number of lines of code that it took to implement this search. Barring the work that it took to write this abstraction, right? So assuming, right, built-in functionality, like you get it out of the box and you don't know because the way that they've taught you to do MVVM is inherently flawed. Like imagine that. Imagine if observable collection did what everyone thought it did, observed collection changes, but it doesn't. It does. What it won't do is it won't surface those collection changes as property changes to the property that it's bound to on the view model. So what are we saying there, right? So like this is where I'm surfacing those. I'm surfacing the result of the change. If I was to do this normally, I would have to do this would be like a get property, right? So let's go ahead and write it real quick so that we can see. This would be a get property, and we would do some new observable read-only collection, which would have to take some new observable collection. And we would do that every single time. We would assign this property, which gives us iNotify property change, and we would assign this property every time the list view changes. And we get none of those animations. We get none of the nicety stuff out of the box that Xamarin.Forms gives us. We just can't take advantage of because observable collection. Because the tool that we have forces us into a bad pattern. The tool that we're using forces us into a bad pattern because the tool is insufficient. Well, yeah, it would have been real ugly to write all of that. Like imagine trying to write all that out yourself. Now let's talk about the fact that these lines of code, right? This is from line 24. So let's go ahead and look at this from line 24 through line 65, right? So we're looking at, what's that, 40 lines of code? 39 lines of code? That's not even true. It's not even true. Let's go from line 24 to line 54. 30 lines of code to implement getting data to my list view, a full featured search. It's got a full featured search. It cleans up behind itself, right? So it's already being a good steward of its own code. It's allowing me to transform. It's giving me an extension point to auto refresh. Meaning, the reason. Let's actually talk about that real quick, and let's spin this emulator thing back up, and talk about the reason why that particular auto refresh thing is important, and why we're auto refreshing on ID. Under the hood, what you don't see is my data access layer. In my data access layer, again, this is mock data that I use to make doing all of this easier. When I go and create, actually we do this in another file. So actually I'll show you a couple of interesting patterns in a minute. Yeah, so when I save here and I go do this save, right? When I execute my save, all I'm doing is creating a new DTO in my underlying data source, right? And then that change in the underlying data source gets surfaced. What you don't see in my drink DTO, and you won't be able to see in my DTO, is that every DTO has a ID on it that is a GUID. That just enforces that I have a unique identifier. In cases where you have like a SQL database and you have integer property for your rolling index and like a UID, generally what I do with my DTOs, just as a this is a free hint, what I do is I create two IDs. I let the database generated ID be the database generated ID, and then I create a UID or a GUID or I created a universal identifier or something on that table. And then when I do my data transfer object, I actually make sure that that ID is the ID that comes down to my device, but I keep the resource ID in a resource ID field. So that's how I do my DTOs, just so that I can make sure that everything is quote unquote unique as it comes down, but also maintain whatever referential integrity that I need. That's just a thing, right? So like I get all of that animation stuff out of the box. When I delete this one, it gets deleted again. That's the bug that we just saw. Let me phrase. I'm jumping around. Let's do the add first, and then we'll get back to that bug. So when I add, I'm basically just giving it this type, and it's automatically giving it an ID under the hood. So because it's getting an ID under the hood, and we want this to be an espresso, and we like it. We like double shots because we're coffee addicts. You'll notice that it loads there, and The reason why it's doing that is because under the hood, that DTO is getting created and that DTO has an ID. So it's getting assigned an ID, which is forcing the auto refresh to kick because the auto refresh sees a new ID in the source cache and is like, hey, I got a new ID. It's time to update data. And then it just surfaces that change. So the hardest thing when dealing with dynamic data is understanding this. Dynamic data isn't a list. It isn't an observable collection. It isn't like a thing that you assign data to. It's a container. You give the container data, it manages the state of that data for you, gives you notifications when the internal state of that data has changed, and lets you act on those state changes. So it is basically like a view model. It's basically like a mini view model for your data, if you will, where you can basically do all of these things. You have full fidelity search sort capabilities right here from the view. I'm not sure if we've changed code, but we'll go ahead like now we want something rich. Oh, we definitely don't want a caramel macchiato. So yeah, you notice the second I clear my search text, because I was smart enough to figure out that my search was wrong, it clears it. So it clears it just by adding, like if I add some bogus search text, like let's say I want something that's like, I want, oh goodness, there we go. Let's type in the right place. I want black coffee, right? I want black coffee, but there's no black coffee on my deal here. So there's no black coffee to be had, right? So I can do that search very easily. Ooh, the next thing would probably be to see if we can not do the throttle when it's not broken like that. But as you see, I get everything right here out of the box that you would normally get, right? I want a almond flat white, right? So we'll do an almond flat white. Yeah, see, like it's really clean. It's really, I'm not gonna say it's simple, it's difficult. Dynamic data gave me a very big run for my money when I first started using it, because I was so used to assigning data to a collection, and I thought that dynamic data was a collection. And it took me about 2 months to it literally took me 2 months to realize that dynamic data is not a collection. It's a container for a collection that surfaces another container. So it's a transform from one to the other. You don't have to use it as a transform, but when I'm using it to do stuff like list views, that's what it becomes. So 30 lines of code, we've got a full search, we've got all of this nicety around pull to refresh. Like we've got our pull to refresh enabled on this. We've got the add, we've got the delete somewhat working. It's kind of broken right now. I'm gonna fix that off stream eventually and get this as part of my my showroom stuff that I linked previously. So if you missed it, check it later. It should be in the chat somewhere where I explicitly have. I'm going to implement this exact thing in my showroom so that we can reuse it. But this was just a let's get it working type thing. So I'm not going to beat up the dead horse too much. This kind of gives you a quick and dirty understanding of how you can use dynamic data and reactive extensions and reactive UI to build a list view implementation that allows full search capabilities, add capabilities, as well as delete capabilities. And we didn't implement update, but we could have implemented update. I don't have swipe actions working because swipe actions was giving me the same bug as this. But this is full feature. So let's go ahead and talk about that bug, and that'll be the last thing we cover today. And then I'll let you guys go ahead and have the rest of your Friday back because, it's Friday. And if you're in the States, it's a long weekend. Happy Independence Day. If you're like me, you're probably at home trying to stay away from people. If you're not like me, you're probably out in the streets licking doorknobs. That's cool. Do your thing. So I could have very easily put the command on the item view model, passed in the stuff, done a whole bunch of junk there. But is it Javier? I think it's Javier Ruiz. I'm bad with names, and I'm bad with names, and then I see people's like Twitter handles and people's like GitHub handles all the time, so I don't know their names. I know them by their handles. So one of the members of the Xamarin.Forms team has an example of using relative source as part of like list view and collection view implementations. So maybe if I did this as a collection view, this might work better, but then there's a bug, and I don't know where it is, but we're gonna find it between us and we're going to fix it between us because we need this to work. But what this is this gives me the ancestor at the relative source. So if I had to guess, this is probably happening because we're removing an item, and then once we remove the item, the binding doesn't know to update. So because the binding doesn't know to update, the binding is now added to the deleted binding, and it doesn't have a command, so there's no ability to execute a command. If I had to guess, that's what my initial guess would be. So all I'm really doing here is using the relative source concept from my view cell. So my view cell, which is the data template for my list view, is providing an extension point for that button to bind to. So we've got to figure out basically how to get that button to rebind when something gets removed from the list. That way we can do the ancestor type. I may even ask Anna if she's willing to help me bring my mind around how to do this outside, or I'll ask either Anna or Glenn. One of the two will probably teach me what I don't know and show me the error of my ways. Because contrary to popular belief, I am not the RX guru people think I am. I just love RX and I'm trying to become a guru. Like, I'm on the path to the guru, right? Like I'm walking the path to the tree to sit and meditate for some years so I can become an RX wizard. I'm in the apprenticeship program, but I'm only my second or third year, so I can't claim full wizard status. But I know a couple spells. Anyway, so this is broken, and this is exactly the reason why I created my showroom application, is to catch problems like this. If Xamarin.Forms says that this is the way that we recommend doing things, I want to be able to prove that it works correctly with reactive UI, and I want to be able to prove that it happens before they ship. And right now, I'm not in a position to be able to do that, so I want to be in a position where that's possible. That said, I actually am thinking of converting that. I tweeted about this earlier. I'm actually thinking of converting. No. Okay, so this whole concept, right? So this whole command definition is actually a Xamarin.Forms thing. Now that we're talking about it, and now that I just got done bringing up that example, let's go. Is it relative source? Yeah, there we go. This is a concept that I found while I was digging through the depths of the internet trying to solve this problem. One of the Xamarin team members has this repository, and it talks about how to do relative source in a list in Xamarin.Forms. So this is actually not an RX concept, and that's the whole point of this, is to figure out how to make this work with RX. This is standard Xamarin.Forms binding. So this relative source is actually an I markup extension, which is giving you relative binding source information. So they're digging through here to find the correct way to find the right ancestor for the item that I'm clicking, to give me access to the item that I'm clicking, so I can give that item to my click event handler on the list view model, or on the lists view model, as opposed to the items view model. You're welcome. So somebody taught me this a couple of weeks ago, because I didn't know how to do this. I used to use the X reference way of doing things. So I used to give it an explicit name and do X reference to the name, and supposedly in Xamarin.Forms, and this is I say supposedly because somebody told me this and I have not verified for myself, but supposedly that's being deprecated. So again, being a good steward of the code, if something is deprecated, I no longer want to depend on it. I want to learn the new way. So this is the new way that Xamarin is, I believe, and don't quote me, I believe this is the new way that Xamarin is pushing, defining this list view, right? Because we're defining this list view, and all we're doing is saying, when I click on a view cell, give this view cell back up to the list that called me, and let its button, right? Because again, the button is actually defined here, and we're actually doing that. Where are we doing that binding? Here, we're doing it here. So we're doing, no, that's the add. We're not binding it here. Oh yeah, that's right, derp. We're binding it here. Yeah, that's the way I knew how to do it. That was the way to do it for years, until they came up with these markup extensions. And then Javier, I think his name is Javier again. Yeah, it's Javier. Yeah. Not butchering somebody's name. I hate getting people's names wrong, because that's your unique identifier in the world. Even though they aren't unique, it's still kind of unique. Yeah, that's his name, Javier. So Javier, I want to say he kind of implemented that whole thing, because I know that there was another issue that we had with the Xamarin.Forms refresh view that he fixed for us in RX. So I'm gonna try and be a good steward this time and do some good faith and figure out how to solve it myself. And if I can solve it myself, I'm gonna PR it. And if I can't, then maybe I'll ask one of the Xamarin.Forms team to help me, because Shane helped me identify it last time, so maybe he can help me fix it. Don't know. But yeah, I want to get this fixed because this should work, right? Like, this should work. You should be able to remove something from a list. You'll also see this commented out. So let's go ahead and show that real quick, just as the last thing for today, and then I will leave you folks alone. Hopefully you learned something today and got value from the stream, because I enjoy doing this type of stuff. Because people come to me and they say, Rodney, I don't understand how to use this. And if I understand how to use it, I'd like to show you. And then you can go use it, and then you can come back to me and say, Rodney, what's the way that you use this, right? And then I can say, well, these are the patterns that I've adopted around this thing. Oh, well, I've found different patterns. And then we're both learning. We're both growing. We're all growing from learning each other's coding styles, how we approach problems. So we'll go ahead and load the simulator. We'll go ahead and do a pull to refresh, get all our data back. So what I was trying to do was show also this, right? Like that contextual concept. Like, you'll notice that I did the exact same thing, the exact same binding relative source in the context actions, which this is just a command, right? Like, this should work no different than the buttons command, right? Like, this is just an additional thing on the list view item, so it should work. Well, it doesn't work. So now the question becomes, how do we get this to work? And again, as somebody who maintains a library, like, this is feedback that I want. If you use my library and something doesn't work, I want that feedback, because I don't want you to be broken. I don't want you to have to come up with a workaround. If I can't fix it and you come up with a workaround, that's great. But, give me your workaround, and hopefully we can get it into the framework as the official way to fix the problem. So that was the issue that I had, is that, like, I can't actually use the context actions. So then I fell back to this and found out that the entire ancestor button thing is kind of broken as it relates to doing it this way when you're doing removals. So I'm pretty sure that if I did this as an update, it would work, but it's not an update, it's an edit. So again, this code currently, and I'll go ahead and post the link to where this code will be, or where it is housed currently. Dynamic list. There we go. So we did a dynamic list. So this is where this code is going to live, and eventually it's going to get pushed over to that showroom place where I said. But at least you'll get the opportunity to take a look at it today, so that you're not waiting on me for months and weeks to push up some code that I said I was going to push up. My Twitter handle is the same as my Twitch handle. So if you have any questions about it, find me on Twitch. Let me know what you think about it. Ask any questions you want to ask. If you want to DM me, if you want it to be public, doesn't matter. If you want to put an issue on that repository and ask the question, I'm fine with it. Ask the questions. If I don't know what you don't know, I can't teach you what I know that solves what you don't know. So help me help you. Help me help the community. Help us find better ways to solve problems with RX, because RX is a Swiss Army knife. It can solve a lot of problems. I like, again, that hammer and nail. It's not the big hammer with the big nail, and it's not a hammer because it's not a nail because everything is a hammer and blah blah blah. It's truly a Swiss Army knife. It gives us ways to solve problems that we may have not thought of before, and going through those exercises, solving those problems, in my mind, is where we get the most value out of RX. So it's not that we have this new hammer and everything is a nail. It's that we have this Swiss Army knife, and we are trying to solve problems using this Swiss Army knife, and we are trying to encounter problems that this Swiss Army knife can't solve. So we know that's a bad place. That's not a performant way to use RX. This is not a good use case to solve with RX. So the more we push that envelope, the more we use that Swiss Army knife, the more we can say that's not a thing that this Swiss Army knife can solve, or that's not the best way to use that Swiss Army knife to solve that problem. We should use a different tool, a more specific tool, or a more generic tool, or a more inclusive tool. Whatever the tool is to solve the problem, we should be trying to find the right tools to solve the problems. That's our charge as good developers, and that's where we fall down when we leave code bases and the next developer has to pick it up and looks at the code and is like, man, what was this guy thinking? Without context, without understanding, they won't know. But to me, looking at some very terse easy to understand, easy to read RX code is a great way. I tweeted the other day that good code should read like good prose. Prose is basically like a short story, right? I'm butchering the definition of prose, but it should read like a short story. And to me, this reads like a short story. I've got a function, and I'm saying when any value of the search text, throttle it on the task pool scheduler for 800 milliseconds. Only give me distinct values when they changed. Go ahead and execute this function against whatever value I have. Transform it, auto refresh it, defer it until it's loaded, filter it, sort it by descending, by type, ascending, by ID. Then observe on the main thread and then bind. Like, this is a story that this code is telling. I don't understand how you look at this and can't look at it and see that it's telling a story, and the story that any person that can read link operators can comprehend. Now, we may be tripped up about dispose many or dispose with or defer until loaded. We may be tripped up on these operators, but we can go look up those definitions. We can go look up the word in the prose that we don't understand, and then the prose makes better sense. So, everybody, I hope you enjoyed your time with me tonight, or today, this afternoon, whatever time it is where you are. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and start my 4th of July celebrations and go find a beer somewhere in this house. You folks have a great weekend, and check me out next week when we look at more ways to solve problems with RX.